Well, let's go back to Katrina Perry, who's there at the airport. And Katrina, let's take you back to that news conference from Donald Trump. And it was the most extraordinary news conference from a president after a national disaster.
Indeed, it started with President Trump describing this as an hour of anguish for the nation, extending his condolences to the families of those who'd lost their loved ones in this tragic accident last night. But shortly after that, he moved to politicise this whole event, which is, again, unusual for instances like this. But President Trump takes his own approach to all matters, as we know. And he moved very quickly to blame his predecessors, Barack Obama and Joe Biden, for having lowered the standards at the Federal Aviation Authority, for having lowered the standards of individuals who work in that agency, who work in air traffic control. Let's have a little listen to what he said.
We must have only the highest standards for those who work in our aviation system. I changed the Obama standards from very mediocre at best to extraordinary. You remember that. Only the highest aptitude, they have to be the highest intellect and psychologically superior people were allowed to qualify for air traffic controllers. That was not so prior to getting there. When I arrived in 2016, I made that change very early on because I always felt this was a job that, and other jobs too, but this was a job that had to be superior intelligence, and we didn't really have that, and we had it. And then when I left office and Biden took over, he changed them back to lower than ever before. I put safety first. Obama, Biden, and the Democrats put policy first. And they put politics at a level that nobody's ever seen, because this was the lowest level. Their policy was horrible, and their politics was even worse. So as you know, last week, long before the crash, I signed an executive order restoring our highest standards for air traffic controllers and other important jobs throughout the country. So it was very interesting. About a week ago, almost upon entering office, I signed something last week that was an executive order, very powerful, on restoring the highest standards of air traffic controllers.
That executive order that he's talking about is the Keeping America Safe in Aviation executive order that he signed after his inauguration last week. And the key part of that executive order was the removal of what's known as DEI, diversity, equity and inclusivity. Basically, these are policies that have been enacted over many years here in the US, aimed at opening up workplaces to individuals who have been historically underrepresented in certain workplaces. He got rid of those policies, and he spoke today at length about the impact that he thought these policies had on the hiring and the, as he put it, quality of person who was employed in these agencies.
The FAA's diversity push includes focus on hiring people with severe intellectual and psychiatric disabilities. That is amazing. And then it says FAA says people with severe disabilities are most underrepresented segment of the workforce, and they want them in, and they want them, they can be air traffic controllers. I don't think so. This was in January 14th, so that was a week before I entered office. They put a big push to put diversity into the FAA's program. Then another article, the Federal Aviation Administration, this was before I got to office, recently, second term. The FAA is actively recruiting workers who suffer severe intellectual disabilities, psychiatric problems, and other mental and physical conditions under a diversity and inclusion hiring initiative spelled out on the agency's website. Can you imagine? These are people that are, I mean, actually, their lives are shortened because of the stress that they have. Brilliant people have to be in those positions, and their lives are actually shortened, very substantially shortened, because of the stress, where you have many, many planes coming into one target, and You need a very special talent and a very special genius to be able to do it.
Now, President Trump also queried just what had caused this incident, which of course is the question that everyone wants an answer to at this point. He did say there were several investigations underway. The Federal Aviation Authority is carrying out an investigation. The National Transportation Safety Board is carrying out an investigation. The Defence Secretary Pete Hegseth said that the Department of Defence would be carrying out an investigation as well because of that military helicopter, that Black Hawk, that was also involved. But President Trump then went on to get ahead of those investigations, if you like, and to speculate himself. He described it as opinions that he was giving as to just what had happened last night, and he raised a number of questions that he had as a result.
But we had a situation where you had a helicopter that had the ability to stop. I have helicopters. You can stop a helicopter very quickly. It had the ability to go up or down. It had the ability to turn. And the turn it made was not the correct turn, obviously. It did somewhat the opposite of what it was told. We don't know that that would have been the difference because the timing was so tight. It was so little. There was so little time to think. But what you did have is you had vision. The helicopter had vision of the plane because you had vision of it all the way, perfect vision of it all the way from at Kennedy Center where the tape was taken. And for some reason, there weren't adjustments made. Again, you could have slowed down the helicopter substantially. You could have stopped the helicopter. You could have gone up. You could have gone down. You could have gone straight up, straight down. You could have turned. You could have done a million different maneuvers. For some reason, it just kept going and then made a slight turn at the very end. And by that time, it was too late. They shouldn't have been at the same height, because if it was at the same height, you could have gone under it or over it, and nobody realized, or they didn't say that it's at the same height. At the same height, still wouldn't have been great, but you would have missed it by quite a bit. Could have been 1,000 feet higher. It could have been 200 feet lower, but it was exactly at the same height, and somebody should have been able to point that out. So all of this is going to be studied, but it just seems to me, from a couple of words that I like to use, the words common sense, some really bad things happened, and some things happened that shouldn't have happened. So you had a helicopter going in an identical direction. You had a helicopter that was at the exact same height as somebody going in essentially the opposite direction. You had a plane that was following a track, which is a track that every other plane followed. And I don't imagine, I know I've heard today that they might have been following the preceding plane, which was pretty close, but not that close, the preceding plane. But you wouldn't have even been able to see that because of the direction that the helicopter was coming in at. So you had a confluence of bad decisions that were made.
Now, just while we've been listening to President Trump, of course, the recovery operation is underway here in the Potomac, and we can just take a closer look. My cameraman colleague here, Ron Skeens, can show us a number of boats have arrived on the river in the area where that plane crash occurred last night. And of course, they're still looking to find the remains of 40 individuals who were lost in that crash and are now in the Potomac River here behind us. So you can see a cluster of boats there as part of that search and recovery effort that is underway. But let's talk a little bit about now the investigations that are to come and what may have happened. We can bring in David Learmont, who's an independent aviation journalist and a former RAF pilot. David, thanks for being with us here on BBC News. We were just listening there to President Trump raising a lot of questions that many people have as to how something like this could happen just such a short distance from the runway as this American Airlines plane was coming in to land. Looking at what we've seen and the limited information, I suppose, that we have at the moment, what's your view?
Well, I think Trump was just, bumbling, as he often does, just speculating from a very non-expert point of view. What he's And he also he brought in the politics of it, and he said he blamed it all on Obama and Biden and said that they were hiring the wrong people. Actually, America for some time now, and I'm talking about years, has had a shortage of air traffic controllers, and Washington Reagan included, has a shortage of air traffic controllers. It's also a very, very high pressure airport. It's very close downtown. It's very popular with politicians, lobbyists, business people, because Washington's international airport's right out in the countryside in Virginia, but it takes about an hour and a half by car to get there. So everybody wants the downtown airport, and for that reason, it's always frantically busy. This was very, very unfortunate, but a lot of people, including myself, would have been said, America has been taking risks for a long time, and this time they got it wrong.
And David, when flights are coming and going as often as they are here at Reagan Airport, and we're so close to military bases as well, what kind of pressure does that put on pilots and on air traffic control trying to operate in a situation like that?
It's real pressure cooker stuff. Washington Reagan Airport, the downtown airport for Washington, D.C., is right on the banks of the west bank of the Potomac River. The Pentagon is just to the north of it, to the northwest of the airport, very, very close, and it has a heliport very, very close to the airport. And trying to weave all the traffic in the correct directions for landing on the different runways at Reagan and to keep the helicopters away from them it's a real balancing operation. But because the demands on Reagan Airport are so high, it's really high pressure on all the controllers, and they do depend a great deal, even at nighttime. And remember, this happened at night in the complete darkness. Even though the visibility was good, it was darkness. And the controllers, because of the tight spaces in which they operate, were pointing out to aircraft inbound, including the unfortunate one, the inbound aircraft, and directing the pilots where to look for the helicopters that were traveling nearby. But this is nighttime. The helicopters and aircraft have anti-collision beacons, and they have navigation lights on them. The only trouble is that this is all at low level, and there are lights on both banks of the river, the lights of the city, the lights of the airport, and a helicopter pilot could look out the window and say to the controller, yes, I think I have that aircraft in sight, except he's looking at the wrong one, or he's looking at a set of lights he thinks is the aircraft. So as I say, the USA, particularly Washington, has been taking risks for years, and it's come back to bite them.
OK, David Learmont there, do stay with us. The other point to note, which we learned from President Trump's press conference a little earlier, is that they haven't yet named the victims of this collision, but he did say that there were individuals from several other countries involved here. We know there were some Russian champion figure skaters, so we do expect to get that information in about an hour as to the nationality of some of those individuals who've lost their lives. Back over to you, Matthew.